more about the meeting today between President Biden and Chinese President Xi. Let's welcome Council on Foreign Relations President Michael Froman. He served as U.S. Trade Representative in the Obama administration. Mr. Ambassador, I think that you say even a leadership statement is going to be hard enough to get something everyone agree on. If we can't do that, does anything really substantive happen? And, well, although we did send people over to try and get the talks about military, to get talking again, that did not happen. If we did accomplish that, that would be enough, wouldn't it?
Oh, yes. I mean, there are really three things going on in San Francisco. There's the APEC leaders meeting itself, which is 21 economies. And that really just sort of moves ahead issues like inclusive growth, sustainability, cooperation, integration. And those will be modest steps forward. There's the Bai Xi summit that you were just talking about, where I think actually they're coming out with some decent, modest deliverables. The goal is really to stabilize the relationship going into 2024, when you've got elections in Taiwan, elections here, of course, where China is likely to play, the issue of China is likely to play a big issue. So I think both leaders, both countries have a strong incentive to get done what they can get done, but most importantly, to send a signal that they want a stable relationship going into 2024.
Do you think, Ambassador, that we're in a stronger position because of at the expense of China with the economic problems that are so well documented that President Xi and China is having at this point? Do we have high ground?
Well, I agree with that, Joe. I think a year ago, the common refrain coming out of Beijing was the U.S. is in inevitable decline, China is on the rise. Now here, a recession, while it still is possible, seems to be receding on the horizon. And in China, they've got much slower growth, high youth unemployment, and many of the tools that they would use to get out of this situation, like investing in property or investing in infrastructure, aren't really available to them anymore. They've sort of used that tool up. And in fact, that's become part of the problem. So I think the U.S. goes into these meetings in a relatively strong position, given our economic performance vis-a-vis China.
So foreign investment is near and dear to President Xi and more important than ever. Does that mean that some of these things that worst case scenarios that we read about all the time in the press for why we should fear China, are those put on the back burner in China because they need foreign investment? They need the United States at this point? Can we, add 5 years to when Taiwan goes, or whatever the things we're worried about? I mean, they're still building a military base near Cuba. They're still buying up land, still sending spy balloons. Is any of that going to change?
Well, I don't think we can afford to be complacent about it. I think they're still engaged in a very significant military buildup, a significant nuclear weapons buildup as well, and they're exerting themselves around the world. Doesn't mean that they don't have domestic issues that they have to deal with, but I certainly wouldn't underestimate their capacity to deal with them. On the foreign investment, it'll be interesting to see, because on one hand, President Xi has been sending a very strong message of wanting foreign companies, including U.S. companies, to come back to China, invest. He wants U.S. CEOs to come back. On the other hand, in how they've implemented some of their new anti-espionage laws or their data laws, they're detaining foreign executives. They are raiding offices of U.S. and European firms. And that's sending a chilling effect to the investment community precisely at a time when they would like to attract it.
Ambassador Froman, how directly do you think the president can say, look, we want you to put pressure on Iran. We want you to put pressure on Russia. I mean, how can that conversation happen as a function of these other issues, which maybe we have leverage with or maybe we don't?
I think that those conversations can happen, and I'm sure that they will happen. The question is, what is China's response? Because right now, I think China is enjoying the fact that we're sort of tied down in Ukraine, we're tied down in the Middle East. It's a good distraction from what was going on a year or so ago when we were all talking about Taiwan. And so I think from China's perspective, whether it's through Russia or whether it's through Iran through its proxies, Hamas and Hezbollah, that the U.S. is sort of being pinned down and being brought back into the Middle East and Europe precisely at a time when it had hoped to complete the pivot or the rebalance to Asia.
So it doesn't sound like the U.S. does have leverage. I mean, I'm just trying to understand, you know, in terms of the interplay between these issues. Is there one, or do they happen discreetly? Because on one hand, you've got all these U.S. CEOs paying $2,000 a plate to have dinner with President Xi, and on the other hand, you know, China's, you know, we're relying on the fact that China needs foreign direct investment. I mean, it's sort of, it's very muddled here.
I would not overstate our leverage over China's decision. Mm-hmm. China has been remarkably disciplined in pursuing its self-interest narrowly defined. And I think the onus is on us and the rest of the world to demonstrate to China that reestablishing peace in Europe and in the Middle East is in its interest, and not that they were going to have leverage in such a way to force them to do something that they wouldn't otherwise see as being very much in their short or medium term interests.
I mean, I would think that even long term, the two superpowers is a pretty good world, because you sell to each other, and you know, you manufacture things, sell it to them, they buy things from us. You know, there's comparative advantage. But is that long term? Does that go against what the real motivation for the CCP is, Mr. Ambassador? Do they want to take over? And do they want to basically have us more subservient to China?
I don't think, unlike the Cold War, the Soviet Union, I don't think China hopes to export its ideology or its system to other countries. I think it wants to make sure it has access to everything it needs anywhere in the world to succeed in its own domestic agenda. So that's why it's investing all over the world to get access to commodities, to the basic inputs, to food, where it has a real problem in terms of food security. It's using all of its tools at its disposal, like the Belt and Road Initiative, to try and bring other countries closer to it. And so I think it's a bit more, they would love just to be left alone by the U.S. to go out and do whatever they need to do to support the kind of growth that they need.
You think it's altruistic? They want to bring their billions of people into the modern world, or is it they need to do that for the CCP to stay in power?
I think the legitimacy of the CCP up to this point has been dependent on being able to deliver that kind of high economic growth and raising people out of poverty, bringing people from the countryside into the cities, and creating a real middle class life for hundreds of millions of Chinese. They've been quite successful in doing it. It's now plateaued, and they need to think through what their next stage is.